Welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast, where your host, Josh Sweeney, will give you, the business leaders, HR professionals, and company culture aficionados, the knowledge you need to take your company culture to the next level.
Hello, my name is Josh Sweeney, and welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about assessing culture fit during the interview process. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Prototype Prime for this amazing podcasting room. If you're not familiar with Prototype Prime, they are a technology co-working space in Peachtree Corners, Georgia, and I recommend that you check them out. So, how do we assess the culture fit during the interview process? We talk a lot about company culture here. That is the theme of this entire podcast. So we really need to get into the roots of how do you make sure that the people coming on board in your organization fit the culture. For this session, we're not going to go too deep into figuring out what your company culture is. That takes a good bit of work and a good bit of thought, and we'll probably highlight that in another podcast. But once you know what your culture is, once you know what you're hiring for, there's a few different ways that people inject that into the hiring process. And what I generally group them into is it's either happens on the front end, it happens on the back end, or it happens throughout. So I'm going to start off with the front end items. So in the beginning, the front end, the beginning of the process, we like to send out culture questions. So if you apply for a position in our organization, you're immediately going to get an email response that asks you to fill out 4 questions that are all culture-based. And by the way that you answer those, we get a good feeling as to whether you are a fit based on our company culture and who we are. With that, there's going to be a number of questions, and figuring out some of those questions is quite difficult. But an example is, what kind of phone do you have and what operating system's on it, and why did you select that phone? So we're a technology-driven organization. We need people who can use technology, are familiar with it, and that's just one little piece of early information we get around that person and their view on technology is what kind of phone they have. And we go into this in another podcast as well around the good and the bad answers on that. But in the front end, you want to have a number of culture questions that are going to filter people out or pull people into the second step of the process. Now, what we've also seen is upfront visualizations around the general interactions with a person. So assessing culture fit, a lot of times you just have to meet somebody and go, are they a fit for our organization? Do I feel like we can be around this person for 9, 10, 11 hours a day, whatever it might be? In other ways, we call this the drink test. Like, could you go out and have a beer with this person and have a good conversation and carry on? Do you connect in that way? Or in a business sense, if you're traveling and you get a layover in the airport, is this somebody we're going to want to sit next to for the next 4 hours before you get on your flight? So there's lots of things that are a little bit about feel, right? Do you connect with this person? Do you feel that they'll connect with everybody else or as many people in the organization as possible? So that's more of a front end check around how do they present themselves? How are they dressed? How do they speak? How do they communicate? And can you get along with them? Then you also have some back-end culture checks, so ones that are further along in the process. So some organizations we work with have a head of culture or queen of culture, various different titles around that. And they actually have this person come in as the last part of the interview, and they do a culture interview. So they go through a certain set of processes to try and uncover this person's culture and who they are at a deeper level and match that to the company and say, does it match the company or does it not match the company, and do we need to pass on this? And oftentimes the culture interview piece that I've seen is a point in which it will make or break. This person that you're interviewing could have done phenomenal throughout the entire process, and then they get to the culture check and it doesn't work out, and that means that they will not move forward. So if you don't pass the culture check, that's the one thing that you just don't get any leeway on, as opposed to maybe a knowledge gap where it's something that's easy to make up. Because there's certain things just culturally in who you are and how you work and your work ethic that are not a match for a given company. And then lastly, what we've done in the past and what I did in our CRM organization was when you did interview with multiple people, it was a unanimous vote. So when we got done, we looked at everybody, and before starting any conversation, it was yes or no. Yes or no. That's all we want to hear. Because we didn't want to get any groupthink or any other things where people kind of are on the fence or anything like that. So after the interview, we went around and said yes, no, and people said yes, people said no. Often to not get groupthink, you have to do that separately at the end, and there's other strategies for that, but it's a unanimous vote. So if everybody didn't feel like this person would be a good fit in the organization, then one or two or more would say no, and that ended it. And that saved us many times. And I have to share that every time we decided to hem and haw over it and maybe buck it, it was detrimental to the culture of the company. It did not work out. I can't think of one person where we were on the fence about that actually did work out. And I think that's an important point. When you're hiring people, you want it to be 100% slam dunk right from the beginning, because other challenges will come up throughout the natural course of employment. So unanimous vote was the last way that we injected a culture check at the end of our process. So as a recap, do you want to do culture checks on the front end or the back end or throughout the process? And also think about the ways that you're checking on or doing some sort of culture check throughout your process and how that fits within your organization.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Epic Company Culture Podcast with Josh Sweeney. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. For additional content and transcripts, visit epicculture.co. If you have questions or topics you would like us to address or expand on, tweet us at epicculture1 or email at podcast@epicculture.co.